The morning sun had barely crested the hills when Magnolia Cypress collapsed against the weathered fence post. Her towering frame doubled over as another wave of pain shot through her massive belly. At 6 feet 7 inches, she had always been a sight to behold in the small farming town of Willowbrook, but now, 8 months pregnant with what felt like a boulder inside her, she cut an even more imposing figure. "Ma'am? Ma'am? Are you all right?" The voice belonged to Jasper Bramblewood, a slight man of modest means who worked the struggling ranch just beyond the township limits. His calloused hands were already reaching out to steady her before he'd fully processed the scene, this giant of a woman, clearly with child, swaying dangerously near his property line. Magnolia lifted her head, her steel-gray eyes meeting his concerned brown ones. "I'm carrying a giant baby," she gasped, one hand pressed against the small of her back, the other cradling her enormous stomach. "Doc Weatherby says it's the biggest he's ever seen, and I can't make it back to town." Jasper's mouth fell open. He'd heard whispers about the mysterious tall woman who'd appeared in Willowbrook 6 months ago, renting the old Hartwell cottage on the outskirts. Folks said she'd come from back east, running from something or someone, but nobody knew what. What he hadn't expected was to find her on his land, clearly in distress and more pregnant than any woman had a right to be. "Giant baby?" he stammered, then shook his head. "Never mind that now. You need help." Without another word, he scooped his arms around her waist, though his head barely reached her shoulder. "Lean on me. My cabin's just through those trees." Magnolia had no choice but to accept his aid. As they stumbled together across the uneven ground, she found herself studying this peculiar little man who'd appeared like an answer to prayer. His clothes were patched and worn, his boots held together with leather cord, but his touch was gentle and his voice kind. "What's your name?" she asked between labored breaths. "Jasper Bramblewood." "Kay, and you're the lady from the Hartwell place. Aren't you Magnolia something, ... double quotes, Cypress." Magnolia Cypress. Another contraction seized her, and she gripped his shoulder so tightly she feared she might crush his bones. "Sweet mercy, this child is trying to split me in two." Jasper's cabin came into view, a humble structure with a crooked chimney and a roof that had seen better days. But it was clean and warm, and right now it looked like paradise to Magnolia. As he helped her onto his simple cot, she caught sight of her reflection in his small mirror. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins. Her face was flushed and damp with perspiration, and her dress, the largest she could find in 3 counties, stretched tight across her massive belly. "I must look a fright," she murmured. Jasper was busy stoking the fire, but he glanced over his shoulder. "You look like a woman about to bring life into this world. It's nothing more beautiful than that." The simple honesty in his words made something twist in Magnolia's chest that had nothing to do with the baby. She'd grown accustomed to stares and whispers, 2 men either being intimidated by her size or treating her like a curiosity. But Jasper looked at her like she was simply a person in need. "The baby's not due for another month," she said, gripping the edge of the cot as another wave hit. "But I've been having pains since yesterday. Started small, but now ... Now they're coming faster," Jasper finished, his face grave. "I'll ride to town for Doc Weatherby." "No." The word tore from her throat with surprising force. "I mean ... There's no time. And besides, I can't have people knowing I'm here." "Not yet." Jasper studied her face, reading the fear and desperation there. Whatever she was running from, it was still chasing her. "Then I guess it's just you and me," he said quietly. "And one giant baby." As the hours crawled by, Jasper proved himself more capable than Magnolia had dared hope. He boiled water, gathered clean linens, and spoke to her in soothing tones when the contractions grew fierce enough to make her cry out. Between the waves of pain, she found herself studying his face weathered beyond his years, but kind, with eyes that held depths she hadn't expected. "Tell me something," she gasped during a brief respite. "Why aren't you married? A good man like you should have a wife, children of his own." Jasper's hands stilled as he wrung out a cool cloth. "Hard. To court a lady when you can barely keep yourself fed. This ranch, ... It was my daddy's and his daddy's before him. But the soil's played out, and I can't afford the seed for a proper planting. What about the bank?" A bitter laugh escaped him. "They'd take this place faster than you could blink if I gave them cause. As it is, I'm behind on payments." He placed the cloth gently on her forehead. "But enough about my troubles. What about you? Where's the father of this giant baby?" Magnolia's face darkened, and she turned her gaze to the cabin's small window. "Dead. Has been for months now. I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be." The words came out harder than she'd intended. Cornelius Blackthorne was a wealthy man back in Boston, but he was also a cruel one. When I told him about the baby, he said terrible things. Called me unnatural. Said no child of his would be born to a freak. Jasper's jaw tightened. Like the world's better off without him. Perhaps. But he left me with nothing except his name and this child. She pressed both hands to her belly. His family threw me out the moment they learned he'd died. Said I was a gold-digging giantess who'd probably killed him for his money. And did you? The question hung in the air between them. Magnolia met his eyes steadily. He choked on his dinner while screaming at me about how he'd never acknowledge a monster child. I watched him die and didn't lift a finger to help. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Does that make me a murderer? Jasper considered this carefully. Makes you human. Can't say I'd have done different. Another contraction seized her then, stronger than any before, and she gripped his hand with surprising force. He didn't wince, didn't pull away, just held tight and let her ride it out. There's something else, she panted when it passed. Something about this baby that isn't natural. What do you mean? I was bigger than most women even before. I got with child, but this. She gestured helplessly at her enormous belly. Doc Weatherby back in Boston said he'd never seen anything like it. The baby's too big, growing too fast. He said if I tried to deliver it naturally, you'll be fine, Jasper said firmly. Both of you will. How can you be so sure? He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. My grandmother was a midwife. Helped deliver half the babies in this county before she passed. She always said women's bodies know what they're about, even when the mind gets scared. And if she was wrong, then we'll face whatever comes together. The simple promise undid something in Magnolia's chest. She'd spent so many months alone, carrying this burden and this fear. To have someone this kind, gentle manner to share it felt like the first real gift she'd received in years. Why? She whispered. Why would you help a stranger? Why would you care what happens to me and this baby? Jasper's calloused hand cupped her cheek, and she leaned into the touch despite herself. Because sometimes strangers are just friends we haven't met yet. And because, ... double quotes, he hesitated, then forged ahead. Because I've been alone in this cabin for 3 years now. And having you here feels like waking up from a long, cold dream. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The first drops of rain began pattering against the windows. The storm hit Willowbrook with a vengeance, just as Magnolia's labor intensified. Rain lashed against the cabin windows while thunder shook. The very foundations, as if nature itself was responding to the drama unfolding within those humble walls. Something's wrong, Magnolia gasped, her face pale and slick with sweat. This baby, ... It's not moving right. Jasper knelt beside the cot. His shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair damp with perspiration. He'd never delivered a baby in his life, but his grandmother's words echoed in his memory. Listen to the mother, trust her body, and pray for guidance. Tell me what you're feeling. Stuck, she panted, her massive frame trembling with effort. Too big to... I can't. Another contraction seized her, and she let out a cry that seemed to shake the rafters. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the cabin in stark white relief. In that moment, Jasper saw something that made his breath catch. Magnolia's belly wasn't just large, it was moving in ways that defied explanation, as if whatever was inside possessed a strength beyond any normal child. Magnolia, listen to me, he said, gripping her hands. I need you to push when I tell you, and rest when I say rest. Can you do that? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm scared, Jasper. What if this baby kills me? What if it's not... Not right. Then we'll love it anyway, he said, without hesitation. Now push. For the next hour, they battled together against forces neither fully understood. Each contraction seemed to grow stronger, more violent, as if the child was fighting its way into the world with supernatural determination. Magnolia's cries mingled with the howling wind, and more than once Jasper feared they might lose both. Mother and child. Then, just as the storm reached its peak fury, everything changed. I can see the head. Jasper shouted over the thunder. One more push, Magnolia, one more. She bore down with every ounce of strength in her enormous frame, and suddenly the baby slipped free in a rush of fluid and blood. Jasper caught the infant, his eyes widening at what he held. The child was indeed giant, larger than any newborn he'd ever imagined, but perfect in every way. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a lusty cry that matched the thunder outside. And yet there was something about the baby's eyes, a depth and awareness that seemed impossible in one so newly born. Is it? Magnolia struggled to sit up, her voice hoarse from hours of crying out. A boy, Jasper breathed, carefully cleaning the infant before placing him in his mother's arms. A beautiful, healthy boy. Magnolia cradled her son against her chest, and the moment she did, the storm outside began to quiet. The wind died to a whisper. The rain gentled to a soft patter, and the thunder rolled away into the distance. Look at him, she whispered, wonder replacing the fear in her voice. Look how perfect he is. The baby was indeed remarkably twice the size of a normal newborn, with a crown of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. When he looked up at his mother, his tiny hand reached out and grasped her finger with surprising strength. What will you call him? Jasper asked softly. Magnolia considered, studying her son's face in the lamplight. Goliath, she said finally. Goliath Cypress. If the world wants to call him a giant, then let him bear the name with pride. As if approving of his name, baby Goliath let out another cry, not of distress, but of triumph. And in that moment, watching this extraordinary woman hold her extraordinary child, Jasper felt something shift in his chest. Love, pure and unexpected, bloomed like wildflowers after rain. What happens now? He asked. Magnolia looked up at him. This man who had helped bring her son safely into the world and saw her future reflected in his gentle brown eyes. Now, she said softly, we figure out how to be a family. Outside, the first rays of dawn broke through the dissipating storm clouds, painting the world in shades of gold and promise. 3 weeks had passed since Goliath's dramatic entrance into the world, and the baby continued to amaze everyone who saw him. He was growing at an extraordinary rate already, the size of a 3-month-old infant, but his temperament was as gentle as his mother's heart was fierce. Jasper had insisted that Magnolia and Goliath stay in his cabin while she recovered. And With each passing day, the arrangement felt less temporary and more like home. He'd fashioned a cradle from apple wood, large enough to accommodate the rapidly growing child, and spent his evenings carving toys that Goliath wouldn't outgrow too quickly. "You don't have to do all this," Magnolia said one evening as she watched. Jasper worked by lamplight, his weathered hands carefully shaping a wooden horse. She was nursing Goliath, who required feeding almost constantly to fuel his remarkable growth. "I want to," Jasper replied, not looking up from his carving. "Feels good to have a purpose beyond just surviving day to day." "Is that what I am to you? A purpose?" He finally raised his eyes to hers, and the expression there made her breath catch. "You're everything I never dared to dream of. You and Goliath." Both the simple honesty of his words sent warmth flooding through her chest. Over these weeks, she'd watched him transform from a struggling rancher into something approaching a father figure. He rose early to tend the animals, then returned to help with Goliath. He cooked meals and washed clothes without complaint, and in the evenings, he would sit beside her and tell stories that made them both laugh. "Jasper," she began carefully, "what we have here, it can't last forever. People in town are starting to talk. They know I'm here, and sooner or later someone's going to come asking questions. Let them ask." His knife stilled against the wood. "I'm not ashamed of caring for you." "But your reputation?" "My reputation." He laughed, but there was no humor. "In it, Magnolia, I'm a dirt-poor rancher who can barely keep his land. My reputation isn't worth the paper it's printed on." She shifted Goliath to her shoulder, gently patting his back until he released a satisfied burp that would have done. Credit to a full-grown man. "You're worth more than you know." "Am I?" He set down his carving and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "Because sometimes I wonder if this is all a dream. I'll wake up tomorrow and find you gone, like you were never here at all." Without thinking, Magnolia reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough from years of hard labor, but his touch was gentle as always. "I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you want me to." "Never," he whispered fiercely. "I'd rather lose the ranch than lose you." "You won't lose either." The conviction in her voice surprised them both. "I have money, Jasper. Not much, but enough. Enough to pay off your debts and maybe buy some proper seed for spring planting." He pulled his hand free and stood abruptly. "I won't take charity. It's not charity." She rose as well, Goliath still cradled against her shoulder. "It's investment. In our future. Our future." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Magnolia felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she took a step closer to him. "If you want one, with us." For a long moment, Jasper simply stared at her. Then, slowly, he reached out and cupped her face in his hands. "Magnolia Cypress, you're 7 inches taller than me. You've got a baby that could probably lift a full-grown cow. And you're running from a past that might catch up with us both." Her heart sank, and I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my whole life." Before she could respond, he rose up on his toes and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and tasted of possibilities, and when they broke apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," he whispered against her lips. "Marry me, and let's raise Goliath together. Let's make something beautiful out of all this strangeness." Magnolia felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered back. "Yes, Jasper Bramblewood. I'll marry you." In her arms, baby Goliath cooed softly, as if blessing their union. The wedding of Magnolia, Cypress, and Jasper Bramblewood became the talk of Willowbrook, though not for the reasons most couples would hope. Pastor Elijah Whitmore had to stand on a wooden crate to perform the ceremony, while Magnolia towered over everyone present. baby Goliath cradled in her arms throughout the vows. The townspeople whispered about the unusual family, but their whispers carried less malice than curiosity. Magnolia's gentle nature and Jasper's steady character had slowly won over even the most skeptical neighbors. When old Mrs. Pennywhistle's cow had gotten stuck in a ditch, it was Magnolia who'd lifted the animal, free with seemingly effortless strength. When young Timothy Ashworth had fallen through the ice on Miller's Pond, Jasper had risked his life to pull the boy to safety. "Folks are starting to see what I've always known," Jasper said one evening as they sat on their expanded porch, watching. Goliath crawled across the yard with the speed and determination of a child twice his age. At 2 months old, he was already the size of a year-old toddler, but his disposition remained sweet and curious. "What's that?" Magnolia asked, her hand finding his as it always seemed to do during their quiet moments together. "That family isn't about looking the same or being what people expect. It's about love and choosing each other every day." Magnolia squeezed his fingers, marveling at how perfectly her large hand fit with his smaller one. The past 2 months had transformed their lives in ways she'd never imagined possible. With her money, they'd paid off the ranch's debts and invested in proper equipment and quality seed. Jasper's natural skill as a farmer, combined with resources he'd never had access to before, had turned the struggling plot into the most productive land in the county. But their success had brought new challenges. Word was spreading beyond Willowbrook about the giant woman, her unusual child, and their remarkable farm. Strangers had begun appearing at their gates, some merely curious, others with darker intentions. "Someone came by while you were in town today," Magnolia said quietly, her eyes never leaving Goliath as he attempted to climb their newly built fence. "A man in a fancy suit. Said he was from Boston, asking questions about a woman matching my description." Jasper's hand tightened on hers. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. But he seemed to know things. About Cornelius, about the circumstances of his death." She turned to face him, fear flickering in her gray eyes. "Jasper, what if they come for me? What if they try to take Goliath? They won't." His voice carried a certainty that surprised them both. "I won't let them. You don't understand what the Blackthorn family is capable of. They have money, influence, and we have something they don't." Jasper stood and walked to where Goliath was attempting to pull himself up on the fence posts. With a gentleness that still amazed Magnolia, he lifted his adopted son and settled the baby on his shoulders. "We have love. We have community. And we have the truth on our side." Goliath giggled with delight from his perch, his tiny hands tangled in Jasper's hair. Even at his extraordinary size, he was still unmistakably a baby all wonder and innocence and joy. "Look at him," Jasper continued, reaching up to steady the child. "Look at what we've built together. You think I'm going to let anyone tear that apart?" Magnolia rose and joined them, wrapping her arms around both her husband and her son. From her perspective, she could see over the fence to their fields, heavy with the promise of a good harvest. Beyond that lay the town of Willowbrook, where neighbors had slowly become friends and friends had become family. "No," she said softly, her chin resting on top of Jasper's head. "I suppose you won't." "Damn right, I won't." He reached up to cover her hands with his own. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together, all three of us." As if sensing the solemnity of the moment, Goliath reached down and patted Jasper's cheek with one chubby hand, then stretched up to touch his mother's face with the other. In the distance, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but the little family on the porch felt only peace. The storm that had been brewing finally broke on a Tuesday morning in late autumn. Magnolia was in the garden, harvesting the last of their remarkable pumpkins, some of which had grown to enormous sizes under her careful tending, when she spotted the line of black carriages approaching along the dusty road. Her blood turned to ice. She recognized the elaborate Blackthorn family crest emblazoned on the lead carriage door. Jasper, she called, her voice carrying easily across the fields where her husband was working with their hired hands. They've come, within minutes. Jasper was at her side. Goliath balanced on his hip. The baby had grown even larger in recent months. Now the size of a 2-year-old, though he was barely 6 months old, but his gentle nature remained unchanged. He babbled happily at his mother, oblivious to the danger approaching. "How many?" Jasper asked quietly. 5 carriages, maybe 20 men. Magnolia's hands were steady, but her voice betrayed her fear. "They've brought lawyers, maybe even a judge. And probably hired guns." The carriages drew to a halt at their gate, and Magnolia felt her heart sink as she recognized the man who stepped out of the lead vehicle. Mortimer Blackthorne, Cornelius's younger brother, had always been the cruelest of that family. Behind him came a collection of stern-faced men in expensive suits and several rough-looking individuals whose hands rested meaningfully on their weapons. "Mrs. Blackthorne," Mortimer called out, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "Or should I say, Mrs. Bramblewood?" "Yes, we heard about your hasty marriage to this... farmer." Jasper stepped forward, placing himself between the visitors and his family. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, his voice was steady. "This is private property. State your business or move along." Mortimer laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Our business is with the murderous giantess who killed my brother and stole his child." "I killed no one," Magnolia said clearly, though. She didn't step out from behind Jasper. "And Goliath is my son. A Blackthorne heir belongs with the Blackthorne family," one of the lawyers declared, unrolling an official-looking document. "We have legal papers. Your papers aren't worth the ink they're printed on here." A new voice interrupted. "Pastor." Whitmore emerged from the crowd of townspeople that had been gathering behind the carriages. Behind him came Mayor Hartwell, Doc Weatherby, and at least 30 other residents of Willowbrook. "This is our county, our jurisdiction." Mortimer's confident smirk faltered slightly. "You backwater fools have no idea what you're interfering with. The Blackthorne family has resources, and we have witnesses," Pastor Whitmore said calmly. "Witnesses to the marriage of Jasper and Magnolia Bramblewood. Witnesses to Jasper's legal adoption of young Goliath. Witnesses to the fine character of this family and their contributions to our community." "That baby is a Blackthorne," Mortimer snarled, his composure finally cracking. "Look at the size of him. He's unnatural, just like his freakish mother." The crowd murmured angrily at this insult, but it was Goliath himself who provided the most telling response. The baby, who had been watching the proceedings with unusual intelligence for one so young, suddenly reached out toward the crowd of townspeople and let out a delighted laugh. Mrs. Pennywhistle stepped forward. "That child saved my cow from drowning in the creek last month, reached right down and pulled her out himself. He helped me find my lost wedding ring," added Mary Ashworth, pointed right to where it had fallen behind the church altar. One by one, the townspeople began sharing stories of Goliath's remarkable nature, as something frightening, but as something wonderful. His unusual size and strength had made him a local hero, and his gentle disposition had won every heart in Willowbrook. "You see," Jasper said quietly, "you're not just facing us. You're facing an entire community that's chosen to protect this family." Mortimer looked around at the sea of determined faces surrounding his hired men and lawyers. For the first time since arriving, he seemed to realize that money and intimidation wouldn't be enough to win this battle. "This isn't over," he snarled. But he was already backing toward his carriage. "Yes," Magnolia said firmly, "it is." 5 years had passed since the Blackthorne family's failed attempt to claim Goliath, and the memory had faded into local legend. What remained was a thriving farm, a loving family, and a community that had grown stronger through their shared defense of what was right. Goliath, now the size of a 10-year-old, though only 5 years old, sat in the apple orchard helping his mother collect the harvest. His enormous hands were surprisingly gentle as he placed each piece of fruit carefully in the baskets, never bruising even the most delicate specimens. "Tell me the story again, Mama," he said in his surprisingly deep voice. "About the day Papa found you." Magnolia smiled, settling her considerable frame against the trunk of their largest apple tree. "Which part? The part where I thought I was going to die having you? Or the part where your papa caught you like you were the most precious thing in the world?" "All of it," Goliath said contentedly. At 5, he possessed not only remarkable size and strength, but also an intelligence that amazed everyone who met him. He could read better than most adults, solve mathematical problems that puzzled the schoolmaster, and demonstrate a wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. "Well," Magnolia began, "it started with a storm, ... As she spoke, Jasper appeared through the trees, carrying their second child, little Rosebud, who at 2 years old was perfectly normal-sized, but possessed her mother's gentle strength and her father's kind heart. Following behind him came Oakheart, their youngest, barely a year old, but already showing signs of inheriting Goliath's remarkable growth. "Are we telling stories?" Asper asked, settling beside his wife with Rosebud on his lap, while Oakheart crawled determinedly toward his big brother. "The best story," Magnolia replied, leaning into her husband's shoulder. "The story of how we found each other." "Found each other," Jasper corrected gently, "and created something magical." Their farm had indeed become something magical. Under their combined care, it had grown into the most prosperous operation in 3 counties. Their crops were legendary for their size and quality, their livestock healthy and productive. But more than that, their home had become a refuge for Corthal's core. Anyone who felt different or outcast, currently living in their expanded farmhouse, were twin sisters who'd been born with unusual height like Magnolia. A young man whose extraordinary mathematical abilities had made him an outcast in his previous town, and an elderly woman whose talent for healing had once caused her to be accused of witchcraft. Together, they'd formed an unusual but loving extended family. "Papa," Goliath said thoughtfully as he gently lifted Oakheart onto his shoulders, "do you think I'll find someone who loves me like you love Mama?" Jasper and Magnolia exchanged a look over their children's heads. It was a question they'd discussed many times, how to prepare their extraordinary son for a world that might not understand him. "Son," Jasper said carefully, "there's someone out there for everyone. Someone who'll see past the surface to the good heart underneath. And when you find her, you'll know it, because being with her will feel like coming home." "How will I know for sure?" "Because," Magnolia said softly, watching her husband play with their younger children, "love isn't about being the same size or looking alike. It's about choosing each other every day, through storms and sunshine, through fear and joy. Is that why you chose Papa, even though he's so much smaller than you?" "I chose Papa because he saw me early, saw me when I needed it most, and because he proved that the size of a man's heart matters more than the size of his body." Goliath nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom with the seriousness he brought to everything. Then, brightening, he asked, "Can we have pie for dinner?" "I picked extra apples." Jasper laughed. "I think pie sounds perfect." As the family gathered their harvest and headed back toward their home, the setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. In the distance, the lights of Willowbrook twinkled like earthbound stars. A community that had learned to embrace the extraordinary and celebrate the different, it was, Magnolia thought as she walked hand in hand with her husband while there. Children played around them, the most satisfying ending she could have ever imagined.